I've believed in Bigfoot for as long as I can remember. I know what that sounds like, trust me. I've heard every version of that reaction. The laugh, the polite subject change, the "oh, that's interesting" face that people make when they're trying to be kind. I've been the odd one out at enough dinner tables to know exactly how this tends to go. But here's the thing about being a lifelong believer in something that most people consider fringe. After a while, you get tired of just believing. You want to understand. You want to be able to sit across from the most skeptical person in the room and show them, not tell them, show them, exactly why your position isn't as crazy as they think. So that's what I did. I went looking for the strongest possible case. Not the shaky videos, not the campfire stories, the actual hard evidence, the stuff that has been formally studied, scientifically analyzed, peer-reviewed where possible, and still hasn't been satisfactorily explained away. And along the way, I also went looking for the debunking. Because if I was going to make this case honestly, I had to understand where the case falls apart, as well as where it holds up. I owed that to myself, and I owe it to you. What I found confirmed some things I'd long suspected. It dismantled a few things I'd believed without enough basis. And it introduced me to several pieces of evidence that I think deserve to be far better known than they are. This video is everything I learned, the garbage I had to clear out, the evidence that survived scrutiny, and a few things that even after everything I still can't fully explain. Let's get into it. Before I get into the evidence, I think it's worth being straight with you about where I'm coming from, because the way I approach this topic is a little different from how you might expect someone to approach it, given that I've believed in these beings since I was a kid. I didn't come into this as a skeptic who got converted. I came into it as a believer who got serious. And I think that distinction matters, because there's a version of Bigfoot belief that is essentially just vibes. It's, I feel like they exist. I like the idea that they exist, and I'm going to interpret everything through that lens. I understand that impulse, I've felt it. But it's not honest, and it doesn't actually serve anyone. Not the people doing the research, and not the people watching from the outside, wondering whether there's anything real here. What I've tried to build over the years is something different. A belief that is earned, that can survive contact with the best available skeptical arguments. That doesn't require me to look away from the hoaxes or the nonsense, because there is a lot of nonsense, and pretending otherwise makes the whole thing worse. So what you're getting in this video is a believer's perspective, yes. But it's a believer who has done the homework, who has read the studies, who has looked at the footage frame by frame and talked to the researchers and followed the evidence wherever it leads, including the places it leads that are inconvenient. I'm going to show you what actually holds up. And I'm going to be just as honest about what doesn't, because the case for these beings doesn't need the garbage. The real evidence is strong enough without it. And that's exactly what I want to demonstrate today. If I'm going to show you what the real evidence looks like, first I have to clear some of the clutter, because this field has an enormous clutter problem. And honestly, as a believer, this part is almost more frustrating for me than it is for a skeptic, because every bad piece of evidence, every obvious hoax, every shaky video of a guy in a gorilla suit in the background of a camping trip, all of it gets lumped in with the legitimate research and used to dismiss the entire subject. It's maddening. So let me be the first to call it out. The blurry video problem. The overwhelming majority of Bigfoot video footage is worthless. I want to be very direct about that. Most of it shows a dark shape in a tree line, or a silhouette on a hillside, or something moving through undergrowth that could be a bear, could be a large dog, could be a person in a hoodie. The footage is always just unclear enough that it proves nothing in either direction. And the fact that smartphones have been in everyone's pocket for 15 years, and we still don't have a single clear, sustained, close-range video of a Sasquatch is a legitimate thing to grapple with. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. The hoax epidemic. The Bigfoot space has been plagued by hoaxes since the beginning, and some of them have been genuinely damaging to the credibility of the entire field. The most notorious is probably Ray Wallace, a construction foreman from Northern California, who spent decades stomping fake wooden feet through the forests of the Pacific Northwest. When he died in 2002, his family revealed the hoax, and the press ran headlines declaring that Bigfoot had been officially debunked. The problem with that conclusion, as we'll get into shortly, is that Wallace's tracks were crude, and a significant portion of the footprint evidence in the scientific literature is anything but crude. But the Wallace revelation gave a lot of people permission to stop looking, and that was a setback. Then there's the 2008 Georgia incident. Two men who packed a gorilla Halloween costume into a chest freezer with some roadkill, filled it with liquid to make it look frozen, and held a press conference claiming they had a body. A press conference. They sold the media rights for $12,000 before it fell apart within days. This is the level of thing we're dealing with on the low end of this field. The credulous community problem. I'm also going to be honest about something within the Bigfoot community itself, which is that there is a segment of the believer population that accepts almost any claim at face value if it supports what they already believe. Grainy thermal footage from 300 yards, definitely Bigfoot. Weird sound in the woods at night, clearly a Sasquatch. This kind of uncritical acceptance isn't just intellectually sloppy, it actively pollutes the evidence base and makes it harder to evaluate what's real. Good research requires skepticism, even when you believe, especially when you believe, because the moment you start filtering evidence through the conclusion you want to reach, you've stopped doing research and started doing advocacy. So that's the garbage. Let's talk about what survives. If you've ever been told your interest in this subject isn't serious, this next section is for you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what the evidence actually shows when you look at it properly. It's not what most people think. Let's start with the evidence that everyone knows about and almost nobody has actually examined seriously. The Patterson Gimlin film. October 1967, Bluff Creek, Northern California. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin are on a horse riding expedition in a remote stretch of the Six Rivers National Forest when they round a bend and encounter a large, upright, hair-covered figure walking along the sandy bank of a creek. Patterson grabs his 16mm camera, falls off his horse, gets to his feet and films roughly 60 seconds of footage before the figure disappears into the tree line. And for nearly 60 years, that footage has been the central exhibit in one of the strangest ongoing debates in the history of American popular culture. The standard skeptical position is simple. It's a man in a suit. Roger Patterson was already in the Bigfoot business. He'd written a book. He'd been leading expeditions. He had every reason to want this footage to be real or to appear real. The whole thing is too convenient. Man in a suit. I've believed in this footage for a long time, but I wanted to understand exactly why. Not just feel it, but be able to articulate it. So I went looking for the suit, as hard as I could. The stride. The footprints cast at the Bluff Creek site in the days following the filming show a step length of approximately 4 feet, nearly 4 feet between each successive footprint. This is for a figure that is walking, not running. Calmly. Bob Hieronymus, the man who came forward in 2002 claiming he was the one inside the suit, does not walk with a 4-foot stride. Essentially, no human being on the planet walks with a 4-foot stride as a casual gait. When researchers challenged Hieronymus to demonstrate his claimed gait from the film, he couldn't come close to replicating it. The musculature. This is the detail I find most compelling, and it's one that becomes far more apparent in the frame-by-frame restoration work that has been done on the film in recent years. A forensic photo archivist, someone with no stake in the Bigfoot debate, has been painstakingly restoring and clarifying every frame of the original 16mm footage using non-AI optical techniques. What the restored frames reveal is something that the grainy original obscures: visible independent muscle movement. You can see the glutes contracting and releasing, the hamstrings engaging, the back muscles, the latissimus dorsi, the trapezius, rippling as the figure moves. Not as a unit the way a costume moves, but independently, muscle group by muscle group, in correct biomechanical sequence. A costume does not do this. A costume moves when the body inside it moves, and it moves as a single piece of fabric or foam or latex. What you see in the Patterson Gimlin film is anatomically correct, independent muscle movement. To replicate that in a costume, even with modern technology, would require individually articulated, separately actuated muscle pads across the entire body. No costume company in 1967 could build that. No costume company today has built that, despite multiple well-funded attempts to replicate the creature in the film by Hollywood special effects studios. The biomechanics, multiple locomotion experts, and physical anthropologists have analyzed the gait of the figure in the film. Their consistent conclusion is that the walk is not quite human. The knee flexion angle, the foot plant sequence, the relationship between hip movement and shoulder movement, all of it is consistent with a bipedal primate of a different skeletal configuration than Homo sapiens. It could theoretically be imitated by a human, but maintaining it consistently, correctly, across 60+ seconds of walking, while also wearing a full-body suit, on uneven terrain, in the middle of an apparently genuine surprise encounter. The probability collapses rapidly. I've been looking at this footage for years. The restoration work only deepened my conviction. The man in a suit hypothesis has more structural problems than most people realize, and the people who've looked at it most carefully, the biomechanists, the costume professionals, the forensic photo analysts, keep reaching the same reluctant conclusion. The film gets all the attention, but I'd argue the footprint evidence is where the scientific case is actually strongest. Because footprints can be examined, cast, measured, compared, and subjected to forensic analysis in ways that a piece of 16mm film cannot. And what the best footprint casts in the literature show is a level of biological complexity that is essentially impossible to fake with the tools available to a hoaxer. The mid-tarsal break in the human foot, the arch is rigid. The foot does not flex independently in the middle. When you walk, your foot plants, loads, and pushes off as a single structural unit. This is a uniquely human characteristic, or more precisely, a characteristic of modern Homo sapiens. Other primates, and likely earlier hominids, have what's called a mid-tarsal break, a flexibility point roughly in the middle of the foot that allows the midfoot to hinge independently during the walking stride. In a significant number of the most carefully documented Bigfoot footprint casts, you can see a pressure ridge running transversely across the midfoot, exactly where a mid-tarsal break would express itself in a track. This ridge indicates that the foot was flexing at that point during the stride, in a way that a human foot does not and cannot flex. You cannot produce a mid-tarsal break pressure ridge with a flat wooden prosthetic foot. The physics don't allow it. A flat, rigid surface pressing into soft substrate produces a flat impression. A flexible foot that hinges at the midpoint produces a pressure ridge. These are different things, and they look different under examination. Dermal ridges. This is the detail that I think deserves to be far more widely known than it is. In a number of high-quality Bigfoot footprint casts, fine ridges are visible on the sole impression under magnification, the equivalent of fingerprints, but on the sole of the foot. These are called dermal ridges, and they are a feature of primate feet. Dermal ridges cannot be produced by a carved wooden prosthetic. They cannot be faked with a latex prosthetic without sophisticated tooling that would itself leave tool marks under magnification. Several dermatoglyphics experts, scientists who specialize in the study of fingerprints and skin ridge patterns, have examined selected casts and concluded that the ridge patterns are consistent with those of a real biological primate foot. Not a human foot and not a known ape, but a primate, the shifting scar. This one stopped me when I first came across it, and it still does. In a collection of footprint casts believed to have been made by the same individual, found at different geographic locations over a span of several years, there is a distinctive scar visible on the sole impression. What makes this remarkable is not the scar itself, it's what happens to it over time. In the later casts, the scar has shifted position on the foot. Scar tissue moves. As new dermal layers grow beneath a healed wound, the scar migrates gradually across the surface of the skin. This is a well-documented biological phenomenon. It is also completely impossible to plan in advance as a hoaxer. You cannot carve a wooden foot in year 1, come back with a slightly different wooden foot in year 4, and claim that the subtle positional shift of a scar represents biological tissue regeneration. No one would plan that detail. No one could plan that detail. It is either a real biological foot healing over time, or it is the most elaborate and inexplicably well-executed element of any hoax in the history of this field. These three elements, the mid-tarsal break, the dermal ridges, and the shifting scar, are the footprint evidence I keep coming back to, not because they're the only things worth talking about, but because they are the things that a flat wooden fake foot simply cannot produce, and that matters. If this is the kind of deep dive you've been looking for on this topic, subscribe. I go this far on every subject I cover, and there's a lot more coming. Hit the bell too. You won't want to miss the next one. I want to talk about eyewitness accounts for a moment, because I know what the standard dismissal sounds like, and I understand why it's tempting. People misidentify things. People confabulate under stress. Memory is unreliable. The cultural mythology around Bigfoot is so pervasive that once someone has a strange experience in the woods, they're primed to interpret it a certain way. All of that is true, and all of it is worth taking seriously. But here's what I'd ask you to consider. The North American Bigfoot database, the largest systematic collection of Sasquatch encounter reports, contains thousands of accounts filed over decades from people across the continent, most of whom sought no attention and many of whom were actively reluctant to share what they'd seen. And across those thousands of accounts, certain specific details repeat with a consistency that is genuinely difficult to explain through cultural contamination or collective imagination. The smell reported in encounter after encounter across geography and time, an overwhelming sulfuric musky odor unlike any known North American wildlife. Not a bear smell, not a deer smell. Something specifically and repeatedly described as deeply wrong, animal but not animal, in a way that witnesses struggle to put into words. People who have never met each other, in different decades, describe it with the same language. That's not what cultural mythology produces. Cultural mythology produces vague agreement with a popular narrative. This is specific sensory detail, repeated verbatim by strangers. The eyes. The eye shine, amber or orange in color, not the green or red typical of most North American nocturnal wildlife. Reported specifically and consistently, and beyond the physical detail, something harder to quantify but almost universally present in serious encounter accounts. The sense of being assessed, not startled, not fleeing, looking back, evaluating. Witnesses again and again describe the experience of meeting the gaze of something that was clearly thinking about them. That is a different phenomenological experience from encountering a known wild animal, and the consistency with which witnesses across all demographics report it is something I take seriously. The after effect. This one is less about what witnesses saw and more about what happened to them afterward. A striking number of serious encounter reports describe a lasting psychological impact, a changed relationship with the natural world, a difficulty returning to the woods, a sense of having had their understanding of reality fundamentally disturbed. This is not the reaction of someone who saw a bear and convinced themselves it was Bigfoot. This is the reaction of someone who saw something they couldn't fit into any existing category. The distress is real, measurable, and consistent. That doesn't prove anything on its own. But it's data. I want to close the evidence section with something that I think is both the most significant and the most poorly understood piece of research in this entire field, and that is the Sasquatch Genome Project. Around 2012, a geneticist and veterinarian named Dr. Melba Ketchum published the results of a multi-year DNA study involving over 100 purported Sasquatch samples, hair with tissue attached, blood, skin, and other biological material collected from across North America. The study involved multiple PhD-level scientists and was subjected to rigorous laboratory analysis. The results were extraordinary. The samples were not contaminated human DNA, as critics immediately claimed. They were not from any known North American animal. What the sequencing showed was something genuinely unexpected. The mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal lineage, was human, modern human, tracing back approximately 15,000 years to a Middle Eastern origin. But the nuclear DNA, the paternal side, was unknown. Not ape, not human, something that had never been sequenced before. The conclusion that Dr. Ketchum and her team drew from this was that Sasquatch is a human hybrid, not an undiscovered ape. Something with a partial human lineage on the maternal side that diverged from a human population roughly 15 millennia ago and has been producing offspring with something non-human ever since. Now, I want to be fair here. The study has been criticized. The main criticisms are two: that the human maternal DNA represents contamination from the researchers handling the samples, and that Dr. Ketchum ultimately published the study in her own scientific journal after mainstream journals declined to publish it. Both of those criticisms deserve a response. On contamination, the samples were handled under the same rigorous protocols used in any forensic DNA analysis, with appropriate controls. The contamination argument requires you to believe that human DNA contaminated over 100 separate samples from across the continent consistently enough to produce coherent results, while the non-human nuclear component somehow remained uncontaminated. That's an implausible contamination scenario. On the publication issue, Dr. Ketchum had a pre-existing agreement with an established scientific journal to publish her findings when the study concluded. When those findings turned out to be as controversial as they were, not just confirming Sasquatch existence, but suggesting a partially human lineage, that journal stopped returning calls. So did every other journal she approached. When the scientific establishment is not willing to publish your findings because the implications are too uncomfortable, starting your own journal is not evidence of fraud. It's what you do when you have nowhere else to go. I'm not asking you to accept the Ketchum study as settled science. I'm asking you to look at what the study actually found, what the actual methodological objections are, and whether those objections justify the complete dismissal the study received. In my assessment, they don't, and if the study is right, even partially right, then what we're talking about is not an undiscovered ape. It is something far more complicated than that, something with human ancestry, something that shares a portion of our lineage, something that has been moving through these forests for 15,000 years, carrying a piece of us with it. That is a thought I have not entirely come to terms with. I don't think I'm supposed to have yet, so here's where I land after all of this. The evidence for Bigfoot, real Bigfoot, not the television version, not the carnival version, but the actual biological and physical evidence that has been collected and studied by qualified researchers, is stronger than almost anyone who hasn't looked closely realizes. The Patterson Gimlin film has structural problems for the skeptic that don't get talked about enough. The best footprint casts contain forensic complexity that a flat wooden fake cannot produce. The DNA study, whatever its reception, found something that nobody has cleanly explained away. The witness accounts taken in aggregate show a consistency that cultural mythology alone doesn't account for. I've believed in these beings my whole life. I believe in them more now, not because the evidence is conclusive, and it isn't, not yet, but because the evidence is far more serious than the dismissal it usually receives, and because the people who've looked most carefully at the best of it keep arriving at the same uncomfortable place. There is something in those forests. We don't have a body. We don't have a capture. We don't have an unimpeachable piece of footage. What we have is a growing body of physical, biological, and forensic evidence that points consistently towards something real. I'm going to keep following that evidence. The DNA question has threads I haven't finished pulling on. There is audio evidence, recordings from the Sierra Nevada that I haven't covered yet, analyzed by a retired US Navy crypto-linguist that I think are going to genuinely surprise you. And there is a body of historical and indigenous testimony about these beings that I think changes the conversation in ways that most people in this space aren't fully grappling with. All of that is coming. If you want to be here for it, subscribe. Leave me a comment below telling me which piece of evidence landed hardest for you, because I read everything and it helps me understand where to go next. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.